tell me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were kind of a regular on the Today Show for a really long time, and
Yes, it
CNN.
was actually about 13 or 14 years. And I was never an employee of the Today Show, but I was on very, very often. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was on talking about issues having to do with psychology or mental health or relationships or wellness. It really ran the gamut, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And then I was on some news outlets that were CNN and HLN, CBS and ABC, all of those talk shows, Montel and Donahue and years ago, and Naomi's New Morning. And so sometimes I would be asked to come back on a more regular basis, but it was the Today Show that I was the most regular on and really enjoyed it.
What was that experience like? I know as a producer, I was always frantic. I've got to find somebody. So what happened? You would get a call and they would say, something just happened and we need someone to discuss it. Are you available? Is that how it worked?
I got many of those frantic calls from producers and I got them often very late at night. And as I hope you remember something about me in this regard, I always like to be very prepared. And sometimes when you get a call at 11 o'clock at night, something just happened, can you be there first thing in the morning? You know, I would try to say yes if it was something that I felt was within my wheelhouse, and I would do it. Sometimes I would arrive at the show and something else would have happened. And Dale, can you talk about that? We're canning that other one. And that happened. And I remember that happened once. It was a call of, the producer planning to do a particular topic. And we had planned on it for about a week or two, as I recall. And I got there and the host, I remember it was Katie Couric. There was something that happened, I think it was an airline crash, actually, it was. And that's what we talked about. And it was right away. And I said, I think we were supposed to talk about this. She said, well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about this. And I said, okay. And we did. And those kinds of scenarios were not that uncommon, which I think is one of the reasons that they called me a lot, because they knew that I could kind of pivot and then I would say, I'm not that comfortable with this, or can we talk about it from this angle? And that was really lovely for me. The calls that were not in the middle of the night were somebody might be promoting a book and they'd say, we'd like to have a psychologist on to talk about the topic with the author. And I did that a lot. And, if I was promoting a book, that they were always very generous and would have me come on. But the others were, if something's in the news and it has to do with a divorce or someone being abusive in a relationship, and generally these were rather famous people, instead of talking about the person, what I would often like to do is talk about the issue. And how does the issue affect most of us who are living in perhaps a similar situation at home, not with the celebrity aspect, but what does it mean in the relationship? And, a lot of what I talked about also was reflective of what was going on sometimes in the hosts' lives, which, they would or would not make public. So they would say, like before the show, they say, I have this issue. Or I remember once I was talking with a host and it was a 3-parter that we were doing about Alzheimer's disease. This was many years ago. After the show, she said, I have someone in my family who has Alzheimer's. And I said, would you feel comfortable talking about that in the next show that we do? She said, no, I really don't feel comfortable. And then the next week I was on, and I guess she processed it and she talked about it. And it really was very, very helpful. People wrote to her and gave her support. And that was really very special. And the reverse is true. Sometimes we talk about something with a host and they had no idea the gravity of the subject was, and they wanted to learn. So that was always interesting for me too. And sometimes we talked about things that were just fun. They used to like to have a lot of fun, and there would be lighter topics, and some with much more gravitas. And it was news driven, whether it was something evergreen that you could always talk about that, like every time at the holidays, we talk about family dinners and how to deal with them. And those changed over time. During an election, that took on a whole different type of feeling of how do you encourage families to be together when they have such divergent political views, and or around COVID, when people have very different views about something that has to do with health and people are coming together. So it really depended also on what was going on in society and how they wanted to shine a light on those topics.
Are you still working in TV?
Every so often, someone will call for an interview. I did get a call from the Today Show in the earlier days of COVID and did a program from home, and it was about resilience. And now I'm doing more webinars and programs for companies and for institutions. There are many people who now are understanding the importance of an internal balance, some kind of a spiritual connection to help contribute to their recovery, their healing, their spiritual journey, and their life journey. And I see these kinds of conversations happening a little more frequently on morning television, let's say, right? And people are talking about it in news stories when they're talking about, this group of people is helping that group of people. Like at the end of a, terrible news report, I'm seeing more, and I'm so grateful. What is the kind act that was done in this community? How are people trying to lift one another emotionally, mentally, spiritually with their acts of kindness? What is the helper's high? I mean, these are things that people never talked about before. And, as you know, my niece and I wrote a book about kindness, so I'm very attuned to this. There are changes that happen in our brain when we do acts of kindness for others, when we do acts of kindness for ourselves. And I think that we are now a little bit more attuned to how we need to protect ourselves, and that, our mind and our body and our spirit are not disconnected, that we really need to be able to notice how this all works together and welcome it, and taking care of yourself physically, mentally. And, there are more people meditating now. And a lot of that has to do with COVID. People got online and they said, oh, I can breathe in a way that's intentional. I can actually relax myself before I do this, this is not something that is foreign. This is something that is now becoming part of our culture. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work with institutions, with businesses, helping them to understand what resilience looks like and how self-care and self-nurturing is very much a part of leadership. I would never get these calls before. And what really gives me hope is that people in leadership are understanding how important it is to reveal themselves, lead with honesty and integrity about mistakes they made, and allowing the people who are reporting to them to screw up from time to time and say, okay, so what are we learning from this? We don't want you to do that again, but how are you, rather than, oh my God, I'm going to get called on the carpet, or I might get fired. And let's see where'd you lose your way? And let's really talk about this. And let's have a collaborative kind of leadership team. And when this happens, it's incredible. If somebody's going to be out, they don't have to lie for why they're out. My kid has a drug problem. Okay, my kid has a drug problem and I got to go and I got to do this family week. So if everybody knows that everybody's got something, they cover for them for that family week. And then the person comes back and they don't have to pretend this, how you doing? How was it? What was it like? And then you get back into work because you don't have this burden on your back of, oh my God, everything's a secret. And I have to deal with this all by myself. And I think it's changing without so much of a stigma. And it's all about the stigma. The whole thing with mental health is the stigma. I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I am an optimist by nature. I pray that we're going to have continuing this cultural shift.